Hi, everyone. This is Maheen, and welcome to the Canadian SME Small Business Podcast. Today, we are discussing the evolution of high stakes technology decisions and the modern shift towards independent consulting. In 2026, navigating digital transformation isn't about following an outdated corporate playbook, it's about vendor neutral clarity and ecosystem collaboration. Joining us is Keith Dazer, the founder and CEO of Deliver Digital. Based in Calgary, Keith brings nearly 3 decades of enterprise technology experience to the table. He has built a highly sought after independent advisory firm that serves mid market leaders across Canada and the US without vendor kickbacks or hidden agendas. He's also the driving force behind the Launch Collective, a community helping elite tech practitioners successfully transition from corporate roles to independent consulting. So, without a further ado, let's dive in and welcome Keith. Keith, it's a pleasure having you on the show with us today. Thank you for joining. How are you?
I'm fantastic, and thank you so much for having me on. This is a lot of fun, and it's an excuse to not look outside at the window where it's pouring rain for the last 4 or 5 days.
Absolutely. It's been quite sunny here in Toronto, so can't complain. But coming back, Keith, let's open our discussion by understanding the shift to independent consulting. Many senior IT and corporate tech leaders, they dream of stepping away from the corporate ladder to start their own independent practice, but most never pull that trigger. Tell us what stops experienced tech leaders from becoming independent consultants.
I think there's a couple things that lead into it, but everyone has this dream of independence and kind of working from wherever they want, showing up however they want. But most people have been raised in a scenario where they, trust their 9 to 5. They feel this sense of stability, and they kind of look over the fence, wondering what everyone else is doing and kind of what the secret sauce is that took them there. And I think that there's a shift happening in the market right now where you're starting to see a little bit less trust in some of those traditional full-time roles. I think you're starting to see, you know, a little bit of a desire for some people that have built their careers over the last 20, 30 years wanting to show up for work in a different way. And I think that some of those things that were previously terrifying to them, which is, all of a sudden I have to find my own clients. All of a sudden I have to do my own marketing and business development. I have to do my own books. Where do I even start? I think the barriers of that kind of fear versus reward trade-off are starting to change.
That is a great starting point, Keith. And it tells us that moving away from corporate security, it requires a complete shift from an employee mindset to a business owner framework. Now let's explore the realities and challenges of the first year in business. Please tell us what causes most new consultants to struggle in their first year.
I think that it's that figuring it out, right? They go from a structure around them that's really supported them through their whole career. They have clear KPIs, they have clear direction, even if they're the ones that are setting it, even if they're a senior leadership level, which is most of the consultants we work with. There's still a really strong framework around them. Everything from a solid finance team to an organization that is built to support them focusing solely on the job that they do. And so all of a sudden they enter this world where there's no other boss. There's no other person around them. There's no other person that kind of helps them see that opportunity, motivates them, and all of a sudden the buck stops at them. And I think that transition can be scary and take a little bit to adjust to. I think that the other thing that, I didn't fully realize, especially when I was going on my own, had that exact same trajectory. I spent 15 years, I make a joke, building companies with and for other people. And when I went out on my own, especially when it was just me on the consulting side of things,
Right.
I think that I didn't realize also how lonely it would be. And all of a sudden, especially as a consultant, you go from going to the Christmas party, going to the after work beers, having the water cooler chats where you have people to talk about things that are going really well and things that are not going so hot, to really being on the periphery of everything. And I think that isolation actually can be really challenging for a lot of people. And so I think a combination of that isolation, and once you get past that initial sprint, I think there's a really um, almost eerily common playbook that a lot of consulting individuals face when they take that leap. They leave their job by some choice of their own. whether it's external factors, whether it's something that's happened to them. They decide they're going to start consulting,
Hmm.
and all of a sudden they get this swell of support. They've spent their careers building strong networks, building strong relationships, and there is this kind of swell of support when people get started, and it's almost eerily predictable. But all of a sudden, as they start getting those first customers, they start to feel some of the pressure of those other challenges that I talked about. All of a sudden, their marketing falls off a cliff. All of a
Hmm.
sudden, their invoicing falls, a couple days behind, then a couple weeks behind, then starts to trail behind. And then I
Yeah.
think that as they start to go through those kind of peaks and valleys, they don't have anyone specifically to share it with, unless it's their wife, their dog, their kids, and so they're just that community around them doesn't quite exist in the same way.
Hmm. Well, thank you really for highlighting what nobody tells us, about the year one. And you're right, it's balancing active client delivery with consistent marketing. It is the only way to break the brutal feast or famine, cycle of consulting. Um, Next up, let's look at why the lone wolf consulting model is now fading. Keith, why is the lone wolf consulting model no longer effective? Like, why is tell us about the death of the lone wolf model.
Yeah. Well, the death of the model might be a touch dramatic because I actually think that there's more consultants in the market now than there ever
Mhm,
have been. With the rise of AI, with the increase and kind of shift in the labor markets, I think that you're seeing so many people that are becoming consultants, either as that stopgap while they look for their full time job, um, or as something that they're meaningfully trying to build around. I think what you're also starting to see in the market is people hitting some of those walls and some of those capacity barriers. And they also have realized that trading time for money on a very granular scale isn't necessarily the best formula for that continued success and the lifestyle they're actually truly trying to create. And
mhm.
so what you're starting to see, and it's not just Deliver Digital or the Launch Collective that's doing this, it's happening, across the market, are some of these groups that have taken different angles and approaches into how do we create some community? How do we bring people together? How do we offer some of those that shared infrastructure that benefits from some of those larger entities or organizations? And
Right.
at the same time, really reward and incent that independence, that freedom, and that individual upside that people are still in pursuit of. And so I don't necessarily believe that the lone wolf consulting model is completely dead, but I think that the opportunity to do way more as a collective just completely outpaces the ability of what you can do by yourself.
Mhm. Well, that is a great overview, Keith, and it tells us that embracing a collaborative platform model, it allows independent experts to offer enterprise-grade scale without losing their neutral, independent voice. Next up, let's explore the value of vendor-neutral technology strategy. Tell us, why do mid-market companies need vendor-neutral tech advice?
So I think that there is this belief that like neutrality is everywhere. And so if I'm talking to the sales rep, if I'm talking to my IT service provider, if I'm talking to the value added reseller that's bringing me my new ERP platform, there's this belief that they're in our corner. And to some degree that's true, and I think they believe that as well. But at the end of the day, if there's a financial incentive to pull you in a certain direction, then all of a sudden, even with the best of intentions, people start to, very subconsciously kind of skew a certain way. A story that I love to tell is, I grew up in a managed service world. And so one of the last big things that I did before launching Deliver Digital was I helped to build one of Canada's larger managed service providers. And there was this narrative of neutrality, which to a lot of degrees was true. But when you go through something like a governance or a roadmap or some of these strategy sessions, it's really interesting how all roads start to point home, um, by design or not. And when there's a revenue opportunity attached to an answer, I think that the inclination is, how do we grow our revenue? And so you're starting to see that pop up across all facets of technology, where you have these business leaders that are really lost. The pace of change right now is just is alarmingly fast,
Mhm.
and they just have nowhere to turn. And so their traditional channels of where they're turning have some ulterior motives that might be financial, that might be service oriented, that might be in line with where they get the best spiffs. And as long as those vendors are funded by the platforms and products they're selling, they're not neutral as much as they might claim to be. And so that's one of the things that we've really had as a core pillar is the ability to actually take no funding from those vendors themselves, be solely funded by the customers that are helping us navigate that world for the desire and intent to be completely vendor agnostic.
This was an important walkthrough in terms of understanding the vendor neutral tech strategy that is very much needed in this day and age. And you're right. I mean, eliminating vendor kickbacks, it ensures that our technology strategy is built purely around operational outcomes rather than a sales quota. Finally, Keith, let's look at why digital projects succeed or fail based on people, not just technology. Tell us, why do digital transformation projects fail, and how can leaders really avoid it?
To put it simply, I think it ties directly back to some of that vendor neutrality. But the as long as business leaders are chasing a technology versus the solution, they're going to fail, you know? And how many times have you heard the story where someone gets enamored by the um, you know, CRM representative with a large expense account that takes them out for the nice steak dinner. They do the demo that looks like the world will be a much better place when it's done, and all of a sudden they get kind of pulled into this narrative of how great that technology will be at solving problems they didn't know existed. And I think that a lot of people with the speed technology is moving at right now get so enamored by the cool things that technology can do, they start to actually create problems to solve rather than look back into their business to say, here's the things that are actually keeping us up at night. Here's the legacy processes that are, taking up 40% of our accounts payable team's time.
Hmm.
Here's what it feels like to be a field worker on the road for 12 hours a day. And here's the challenges that are being faced by those individuals. And by simply flipping that narrative to say, let's focus on the people, let's focus on the processes internally that are taking up our time, and let's focus on solving real problems versus chasing the next great technology. We've seen people get an incredibly um, outsized return on those investments they're making because they're not chasing the shiny thing, that a shiny AI wrapper that's out there, the new platform, the new tech. They're actually just trying to solve problems with technology as that tool rather than um, it being the other way around.
This is important, and it gives us a great picture about the about a lot, basically about why digital projects actually fail and how we can what we can do in order to avoid them. And one solution that comes to mind, and it's great that you highlighted that as well, is prioritizing cognitive alignment and
Yes.
team adaptability over rigid software features, checklists, which ultimately kind of saves a project from failure over time. But overall, this was a great conversation. Thank you so much, Keith, for sharing a lot today, including, what nobody tells you about the first year, being the shifting to independent consulting, of course, the death of the lone wolf model that we also talked about, and of course, why digital projects actually fail. As we wrap up, what advice would you give tech leaders that are starting their consulting journey?
I think don't do it alone. There's, regardless of if you're in Calgary, if you're in Toronto, if you're in Nebraska, there's a community around you of people that are all going through the same things that are at some point in their journey. And it doesn't, as much as you're going out on your own, it doesn't have to be a one man show or woman show.
Hmm.
It can really be a team sport on that front. And it's way more fun to do it with and around people. And finding a collective or people to do that work with in a meaningful way doesn't take away from the independence that you're looking for. It actually helps amplify the work that you're doing. And the other thing would be that it actually can be a ton of fun. I'm always of the opinion that if it's not fun, I don't really want to do it, which might be, a smidge optimistic. But I think that there's this incredible opportunity right now to show up for work in the way that you want, to do really meaningful things, and to create that balance, that equilibrium that is really going to fulfill and sustain you for the next 10 or 15 years. And I think that the leap is scary, but staying the same path is also equally as scary.
And that is a great reminder that your decades of battle scars are far more valuable when shared within a supportive ecosystem. Thank you so much, Keith, once again, for being on the show with us and for sharing such great expertise and your insights.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me.
And listeners, that was Keith Dazer from Deliver Digital, a masterclass in breaking the lone wolf consulting model, navigating high stakes vendor selection, and understanding why the traditional ID playbook is officially dead in 2026. Thank you for tuning into the podcast. Please be sure to visit our website, CanadianSME.ca, for more resources. To learn about how we're supporting the ecosystem, please visit Canadian SME Small Business Foundation at smbfoundation.ca. And before we leave, a special shout out to UPS and ADP for their ongoing commitment to empowering small businesses across Canada. Please keep thriving, and we'll see you in the next one.